Ronan Tate had been raised to hate the name Voss. It was a legacy passed down like a curse, etched into the very foundation of the Tate family empire. The war between the Tates and the Vosses stretched back decades, built on bad blood, corporate sabotage, and betrayal, so deep it might as well have been genetic. Ronan had spent his whole life sharpening himself into a weapon, preparing for the inevitable battles, because in his world, survival meant never losing, especially not to Adrian Voss. And yet, here he was, trapped. The contract in his hand was printed on the kind of paper so thick it probably cost more than his car. He could still hear the scratch of Adrian's pen signing it with the same casual cruelty that had haunted Ronan for years. 30 days. That was how long he had to stay here, under his roof, at his mercy. Across the room, Adrian Voss looked far too pleased with himself. He leaned against the bar like he owned not just the penthouse, but the entire goddamn city. Dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, he was the perfect image of effortless power, a man who had spent his life winning. His ice blue eyes, sharp and assessing, drifted lazily over Ronan, waiting. So Adrian mused, sipping his whiskey. I'm still waiting for the part where you throw a tantrum. Go on, Tate. Entertain me. Ronan's grip tightened around the contract, his nails pressing half-moons into the paper. He wouldn't give Adrian the satisfaction. Not after everything. Not after 7 years of this war. The feud had started with their fathers. A deal gone sour, a handshake that turned into a knife in the back. The details had been twisted by time and 1,000 versions of the truth, but the result had been undeniable. 2 powerful families at each other's throats, each determined to crush the other. Ronan had been 15 the first time he met Adrian. Back then, they had been forced into the same circles, charity events, business galas, the occasional too formal dinner where their fathers pretended civility while planning each other's downfall. Adrian, 2 years older and already insufferably confident, had smirked across the table and flicked a sugar packet at Ronan's head. That's for your father trying to screw mine over, he'd said, grinning. Just returning the favor. Ronan had thrown an entire glass of water at him in response. From that moment on, it had been war. The business battles had escalated into something deeply personal. Adrian stole deals just to see Ronan fume. Ronan leaked rumors that sent Voss stock plummeting for a week. One time, Adrian sent a bottle of Tate Reserve whiskey to Ronan's office with a note that read, "Almost as bitter as you." Ronan had retaliated by buying out the building Adrian had been eyeing for his latest venture, forcing him into a smaller, less impressive space. They had sabotaged each other's careers, ruined relationships, and spent years throwing gasoline on a fire that should have burned out long ago. But it never did. It only got worse, because hatred wasn't the only thing between them. There were the other moments, the ones neither of them ever acknowledged. The way Adrian's eyes lingered too long when Ronan was furious, like he enjoyed watching him burn. The time Ronan had grabbed Adrian by the tie, ready to punch him, only to find himself a breath away from something far more dangerous than violence. And now, after all that, Ronan was standing in Adrian's penthouse, bound to a contract that meant he couldn't leave. He had played right into his enemy's hands, and Adrian Voss was enjoying every second of it. 3 hours earlier, Ronan Tate had never lost to Adrian Voss. That was the only reason he agreed to the bet. The charity gala was supposed to be a simple evening, show his face, shake hands with the right people, and drink just enough champagne to keep from snapping when some corporate fossil started droning on about young blood in the industry. But then he walked in, Adrian Voss. He commanded attention the way fire drew in the desperate and the foolish. Dressed in a midnight black suit, his platinum cufflinks catching the chandelier light, Adrian moved through the crowd with the lazy confidence of a man who knew he was untouchable. People wanted to be around him, either for his power or his charm, and it made Ronan's skin crawl. Adrian spotted him from across the ballroom and smirked. It was an expression Ronan knew all too well, one that meant trouble. "Ronan," Adrian drawled as he approached, a glass of whiskey in hand. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." "I was." Ronan sipped his champagne, not bothering to fake pleasantries. "Sadly, my luck ran out." Adrian laughed, low and amused. "Careful, Tate. People might start thinking you're obsessed with me." "Obsessed? Please," Ronan scoffed. "I'd sooner throw myself off this balcony." Adrian's grin widened. "You always were dramatic. You're mistaking contempt for theatrics. You're mistaking contempt for theatrics. And you're mistaking hatred for fascination." Ronan opened his mouth to snap back, but Adrian shifted closer, dropping his voice just enough to make it private. "Tell me, how many hours have you spent thinking about me this week?" It was a trap, and Ronan refused to step into it. "Not nearly as many as you've spent trying to get my attention," he countered. "Must be exhausting, constantly scheming just to keep up with me." Adrian chuckled, setting his drink down. "All right, since you're so confident, let's make things interesting." And there it was, the moment Ronan should have walked away. But he didn't, because Ronan Tate never backed down from Adrian Voss. "Go on," he said, swirling his drink idly. "Amuse me." Adrian leaned in, close enough that Ronan could catch the scent of expensive cologne and whiskey. "One bet. One game. Winner takes all." Ronan arched a brow. "And what exactly are we playing?" Adrian smirked. "A classic. 1 round of blackjack. High stakes." Ronan nearly laughed. "You want to challenge me to a game of chance? That's barely even a bet." Adrian's expression didn't waver. "Then you have nothing to worry about, do you?" Ronan had spent his whole life calculating risk. It was second nature, an instinct sharpened by years of corporate warfare. He was good at reading people, at knowing when someone was bluffing. He was good at reading people, at knowing when someone was bluffing. Adrian was bluffing. "Fine," Ronan said, setting down his drink. "Let's play." They sat at one of the private tables, a dealer shuffling the cards with practiced ease. A small crowd gathered, mostly other executives who had caught wind that something big was happening. The tension was electric, humming between them as the dealer laid out the cards. Ronan barely looked at his hand before pushing in his bet. All in. Adrian smiled. Bold, confident, reckless, Adrian corrected, matching the bet. Let's see if it pays off. The dealer flipped their cards. Ronan had 20. A strong hand. Adrian had 21. Silence. Then Adrian exhaled a quiet, satisfied laugh. Looks like luck's finally on my side. Ronan's stomach dropped. Fuck. Adrian leaned back, studying him with undisguised delight. Now, about your end of the bet. Ronan clenched his jaw. Name it. Adrian's smirk turned predatory. For the next month, you belong to me. The words sent a sharp jolt through Ronan's spine. Excuse me. You heard me, Adrian said smoothly. 30 days, my terms, my rules. Ronan's breath came sharp and uneven. This wasn't just about winning a bet. Adrian wanted control, wanted to own him. You're out of your mind, Ronan hissed. Possibly, Adrian admitted, tilting his head. But a bet's a bet. And you wouldn't want to go back on your word, would you? Ronan should have walked away, should have found a way out, but that would mean admitting defeat, and Ronan Tate never lost. So instead, he forced his expression into something calm, something unaffected. Fine, he said, standing. Enjoy it while it lasts, Voss. Adrian's smirk deepened. Yo, I intend to. And just like that, Ronan had sealed his fate. Ronan exhaled slowly through his nose, leveling Adrian with a stare sharp enough to cut glass. He was not going to lose his temper. Not here, not in front of him. Adrian, of course, knew that. He thrived on it, pushing just enough to crack the surface, never enough to shatter it completely. He swirled his whiskey lazily, watching Ronan like he was nothing more than a passing amusement. I know you're simmering, Tate, Adrian said, tilting his head. Go on. Let it out. Scream. Stomp your feet. Maybe throw a vase. Oh, wait. You already did that last year at the Bennett Gala, didn't you? Ronan curled his fingers into fists, reminding himself that assault was still technically illegal, no matter how justified it would be. You're enjoying this way too much, he muttered. Adrian's lips quirked. Obviously. Ronan took a slow step forward, closing the space between them. Let's get something clear, Voss. I might be stuck here for the next 30 days, but that doesn't mean I'm playing by your rules. Adrian hummed thoughtfully, then knocked back the last of his drink. That's where you're wrong, he said, setting the glass down with a soft clink. Because for the next month, everything you do, that's up to me. The way he said it, so certain, so utterly in control, sent something unpleasant curling in Ronan's stomach. He wasn't used to losing. He wasn't used to not having an escape route. But here he was, standing in Adrian's goddamn penthouse, contractually obligated to endure his presence for an entire month, all because he had been reckless enough to think he couldn't lose, and Adrian knew it. The bastard took his time looking him over, his gaze trailing from the tense set of Ronan's jaw down to the subtle twitch of his fingers. You're practically vibrating with frustration, Adrian noted, voice smooth as silk. You should be thanking me, really. A little humility might do you some good. You're testing my patience. Adrian smirked. And you're failing the test. Ronan sucked in a sharp breath. He refused to give Adrian what he wanted. He refused to snap. So he did the only thing he could do. He turned on his heel and walked away. Adrian let out a quiet chuckle behind him, the sound somehow even more infuriating than his words. Running already? And here, I thought you were made of stronger stuff. Ronan ignored him, heading for the nearest door just to get some goddamn space. He needed to clear his head, to figure out exactly how he was going to survive this without losing whatever remained of his sanity. He shoved the door open and immediately regretted it. Because instead of a study or a guest room or anything useful, he had walked straight into Adrian's bedroom. His very private, very large bedroom, and from the smug chuckle behind him, Adrian had definitely planned this. Well, Adrian murmured, leaning against the doorway like he had all the time in the world. That's one way to settle in. Ronan clenched his jaw. This was going to be the longest month of his fucking life, the art of being a pain in the ass. Ronan Tate had one goal for the next 30 days. Make Adrian Voss's life as miserable as possible. If Adrian thought he could just own him for a month, then fine, Ronan would make damn sure he regretted it. Step 1. Refuse to play along. The first morning, Adrian strolled into the penthouse kitchen, looking every bit the polished CEO. He was crisp white dress shirt, top button undone, hair effortlessly styled. He paused when he saw Ronan sprawled on the pristine marble countertop, lazily munching on a slice of toast directly over the sink. Adrian arched a brow. Comfortable, very, Ronan said, taking another exaggerated bite. Adrian's eyes flicked to the stack of used dishes next to the sink. Ronan had made sure to use an obscene amount of kitchenware, 3 different mugs, 2 plates, a pan he hadn't even needed. You know, Adrian mused, reaching for his coffee. We have a dishwasher. Yo, do we? Ronan feigned surprise. Wild, guess I'll get to it. Eventually, Adrian took a sip of his coffee, completely unfazed. Just so you know, the maid's off this month. Ronan smirked. Guess you'll have to clean up after me then. Adrian leaned in just enough to lower his voice. Or I'll make you do it myself. Ronan hated the way his stomach flipped at that. He covered it by stretching obnoxiously on the counter, grinning. You wouldn't. Adrian's smirk was slow and dangerous. Try me, Ronan scoffed, but did slide off the counter, only because he wanted to, obviously. Not because Adrian's gaze had turned vaguely predatory for a second there. Step 2. Be as insufferable as humanly possible. Ronan made a point to leave his clothes, everywhere jacket, on the back of an expensive leather chair. Socks abandoned in the hall. A towel mysteriously draped over a priceless sculpture. If Adrian wanted to pretend he had control, Ronan was going to ruin his perfect, curated space. But every time he thought he had gone too far, Adrian just adjusted. One morning, Ronan left a pile of unfolded laundry on the couch just to be a menace. That afternoon, Adrian had it dry cleaned and pressed. Ronan accidentally set an alarm to blast obnoxiously. At 5 a.m. Adrian woke up, turned it off, and went for a run. It was infuriating. Step 3. Weaponized flirting. If Adrian wasn't going to break, then Ronan was going to find another way under his skin. Adrian had employees coming in and out of the penthouse, assistants, business partners, the occasional private chef. Ronan made a game of flirting shamelessly with all of them. A wink here, a lingering touch there. Once, he even accidentally let his shirt ride up while stretching in front of Adrian's head of security, who had definitely noticed. Adrian, however, didn't react. Not at first, but Ronan felt it. The tension, the subtle way Adrian's body language shifted whenever Ronan got too close to someone else. He never said a word about it, but Ronan caught the slight tightness in his jaw, the way his fingers curled just slightly around his whiskey glass when Ronan was being particularly irritating. And then, finally, it happened. One evening, Ronan was leaning just a little too close to one of Adrian's junior associates, laughing at some meaningless comment when Adrian's hand closed around his wrist. Not hard, not aggressive, just firm. Ronan turned, deliberately slow. Adrian's expression was unreadable, but his grip didn't loosen. Having fun? Adrian asked, voice smooth but edged with something darker. Ronan tilted his head, lips curving. Immensely. Adrian held his gaze for a long moment, then leaned in, voice dropping to a low murmur only Ronan could hear. You're cute when you beg for my attention, you know that. Ronan's stomach dropped. Before he could recover, Adrian released him and turned away, already back to business. Ronan stood there, pulse hammering, utterly furious that Adrian had flipped the game on him. Because now, for the first time in weeks, he was the one off balance. The thing about being trapped in Adrian's world was that there was no escape. No distractions. No boardrooms full of people to perform for, just the two of them, circling each other like predators in a cage. Ronan had thrown every trick in his arsenal at Adrian, and yet, somehow, he was the one feeling cornered. It started subtly, late nights, where neither of them left the shared living space, tension bleeding into something else beneath the surface. Arguments that lasted too long, stretched so thin they snapped into something rower, something closer to real. You think everything is a game, Ronan snapped one night, standing toe-to-toe with Adrian in the dim glow of the penthouse. You sit up in your goddamn tower, pulling strings, pushing people around like they're pieces on a board. But you don't actually care about anything, do you? You think I don't care? Adrian's voice was low, almost quiet, but the weight behind it pressed into Ronan's chest. You think I'm some kind of monster who gets off on controlling everyone around me. Is that what you believe? Ronan didn't answer immediately, his breath coming too quick for comfort. Adrian had a way of stripping the defenses down, of making Ronan feel things he couldn't afford to feel, things that didn't fit the cold, calculated persona he'd built over years of fighting tooth and nail. "You're the one who keeps playing at this," Ronan finally said, voice tight. "The games, the stupid bets, like you're untouchable. But you're not. Not with me." Adrian's eyes flicked over him, taking in the way Ronan stood there, every inch of him tense, coiled like a spring ready to snap. "Yeah." Adrian's voice softened, his hand brushing against Ronan's arm, barely a touch, but enough to send a jolt through him. "So tell me, Ronan, what's the real problem here?" For a split second, something passed between them, a crack in Ronan's armor that he couldn't hide, no matter how hard he tried. He didn't want to admit it. He didn't want to admit that maybe Adrian was the only person who could see through the front, the facade that Ronan wore like armor. That maybe, just maybe, Adrian was right when he said that Ronan was afraid of feeling anything real. But he couldn't let Adrian see that. He couldn't let anyone see it. "I'm not afraid of you, Voss," Ronan said, voice low and almost too calm. Adrian leaned in, close enough that their breaths mingled. "You sure about that?" Ronan's heartbeat stuttered, but he didn't pull away. He couldn't. Before he could respond, the sound of the front door opening interrupted them. The tension broke like a shattered glass, and Ronan stepped back, trying to steady himself, trying to breathe like he hadn't just felt something he wasn't ready for. Later that night, the two of them were sitting in front of the fire, the silence between them heavier than the air outside. It had been a long day, full of meetings and reports that neither of them had really cared about. But the shared space had become increasingly uncomfortable, their proximity more undeniable with each passing hour. Ronan hated that they were both so aware of each other now. He hated the way Adrian seemed to be able to push all his buttons without even trying, how every little glance, every passing touch made his pulse race. And then there was the alcohol. It started with a single glass of whiskey. Ronan never meant to get drunk. But it was a slow burn, one drink after another, the smooth burn of the liquor dulling the edge of everything, especially his thoughts. Adrian poured himself a glass too, swirling the amber liquid and watching Ronan carefully. "You're not usually this quiet," he said, voice tinged with something like amusement. Ronan's laugh was short, brittle. "What, you miss the insults? You want me to throw a tantrum or something?" "No." Adrian's gaze flickered for a moment, more serious than usual. "But I do want you to stop pretending like you're fine." Ronan scoffed, half drunk, half furious. "Fine. What the hell do you know about it?" Adrian leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "I know you're not fine. I know what it's like to feel like you're not enough, like nothing you do will ever be enough for them." The words hit Ronan like a slap to the face, but Adrian didn't stop. "You think you're the only one with family expectations. You think I don't know what it's like to be trapped in their shadow, trying to live up to their fucking standards." Ronan's chest tightened. It wasn't supposed to be like this. They weren't supposed to be talking about this. But they were, and Adrian was right. Adrian was right about everything. The silence stretched between them again, this time heavier, more intimate. Ronan could feel the weight of it settling in his stomach, a knot that only seemed to grow tighter. Before he knew what he was doing, he stood, swaying slightly, trying to shake off the lingering tension. "I should go to bed," he muttered, his voice thick with the alcohol. But Adrian didn't let him go. Not this time. Ronan froze when Adrian's hand found his arm again, steadying him. The touch was warm, grounding too much, too close. And before he could think better of it, Adrian was moving even closer, his face inches from Ronan's, the heat of his body making Ronan's pulse spike again. "Adrian." Ronan's voice was shaky, barely a whisper. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Adrian's gaze dropped to Ronan's lips, and for the briefest moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Like everything outside of this moment didn't exist anymore. And then Ronan shoved him away, stumbling back, eyes wide. "No, I can't do this." Adrian didn't move, didn't chase after him. His expression softened, but there was a glimmer of something in his eyes, something like understanding, but also like disappointment. "You're terrified of what's happening here, Ronan," Adrian said, his voice softer than Ronan had ever heard it. "And I don't think you even know why." Ronan turned away, clenching his fists at his sides. He was shaking, and he hated it. Hated that Adrian had seen him, really seen him, in a way no one else ever had. But it wasn't safe. It would never be safe. And this thing between them, it couldn't happen, not like this. Adrian was in trouble. Not the kind he could fix with a well-placed phone call or a strategic buyout. No, this was a different kind of problem, one that had been creeping up on him for weeks, one that started with Ronan Tate being an insufferable nuisance, turned into something dangerous the moment Ronan had looked at him like that, and had fully spiraled into a complete disaster. When Adrian realized he didn't actually want him to leave. What was supposed to be a game, a lesson in control, had become something else entirely. Adrian wasn't sure when it happened. Maybe during one of their stupid late-night arguments, when Ronan's sharp words turned into something softer, something real. Maybe it was when he caught Ronan staring at the city skyline, his mask slipping just enough for Adrian to see the weight of the world on his shoulders. Or maybe it was the moment Ronan nearly kissed him, and then ran like the devil himself was at his heels. Now Ronan avoided him. Not overtly, Ronan still threw his usual barbs, still made a mess of Adrian's perfect world. But there was a new distance between them, an invisible wall Ronan had put up. And Adrian hated it. He wanted to grab Ronan by the collar and demand to know what the hell he was so afraid of. But before he could figure out a way to confront him, a bigger problem landed in their laps. It started with a single news article. By the time Adrian saw the article, his phone was already ringing. Ronan's name flashed on the screen, and Adrian answered immediately. "Tell me you had nothing to do with this." Ronan scoffed on the other end. "Are you serious?" This screws me over just as much as you. Langley wants us both out of the picture. Adrian pinched the bridge of his nose. He had no reason to trust Ronan, but he did. It was infuriating how easily he believed him. So what's the move? Ronan asked, voice tight. Adrian exhaled. We work together. A beat of silence. Then Ronan laughed. Yo, this is going to be a nightmare. Adrian couldn't help the smirk that pulled at his lips. Then, let's make sure it's Langley's nightmare, not ours. Adrian and Ronan had spent years tearing each other apart. Now, they were about to do it to someone else. And God help anyone in their way. For all their differences, they worked together too well. Adrian was meticulous, a strategist, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Ronan was reckless, charming when he needed to be, and absolutely ruthless when he didn't. The combination was terrifying. In less than 24 hours, they'd already turned the tide against Langley. Ronan called in favors Adrian hadn't even known he had, while Adrian maneuvered their resources with brutal efficiency. They were 2 sides of the same coin, chaos and control, destruction and precision. And for the first time in years, Adrian felt like he had a true equal standing beside him. It was infuriatingly attractive. They spent the next week in constant proximity, bouncing ideas and strategies off each other, long nights filled with caffeine and adrenaline. And in those quiet moments, between planning their next move and delivering crushing blows to their enemy, Adrian saw it again, the cracks in Ronan's armor, the exhaustion in his eyes, the pressure weighing on his shoulders. Adrian wanted to fix it, wanted to be the person Ronan could lean on. But he knew better. So he settled for standing beside him, making sure neither of them fell apart before this war was over. And yet, every night, when Ronan fell asleep on the couch after too many drinks, when Adrian found himself watching him for just a moment too long, he realized something dangerous. He didn't want Ronan to leave when this was all over. For once, Adrian Voss wanted something he couldn't control. And that terrified him more than any enemy ever could. It happened on a night like any other, except it wasn't. They had been celebrating a small victory, a crucial move in their war against Langley that left their rival floundering. The tension between them, always smoldering just beneath the surface, had grown unbearable. The drinks were flowing, the walls between them thinning, and the weight of their shared battles pressed into the space between them. Ronan had been the first to crack. You act like you have everything under control, he had murmured, voice low and rough with something Adrian couldn't name. Like none of this touches you. But I see it, Adrian. You care more than you let on, and it's driving you insane. Adrian should have walked away. He should have thrown up his usual walls, pushed Ronan away with some sharp remark. But he didn't. Instead, he had stepped closer, Ronan's breath hitched, but he didn't back down. And then it happened. A moment of vulnerability. A moment of sheer, pent-up frustration. A collision of everything they had been trying to ignore. Adrian's hands found Ronan's collar first, gripping the fabric like he was trying to steady himself. Ronan's fingers curled into Adrian's wrists, hesitation flickering across his face, just for a second, just long enough for Adrian to see that he wasn't alone in this. Then Ronan surged forward, and Adrian met him halfway. The kiss was a battlefield, as volatile as their rivalry, teeth clashing, fingers tangling in fabric, years of animosity pouring into something far more dangerous. It wasn't soft. It wasn't sweet. It was raw, desperate, an admission neither of them was ready to say out loud. When they finally broke apart, breathless and wide-eyed, Ronan let out a choked laugh. Well, that was a bad idea. Adrian's lips were still tingling. Terrible. Neither of them moved. Neither of them pulled away. Reality set in with the cold light of day. Ronan was already out of bed, standing by the window with his arms crossed, staring at the city below. His face was unreadable, carefully neutral the way it always was when he was trying to pretend he didn't care. Adrian sat up slowly. Ronan, it was a mistake. Ronan's voice was clipped, emotion buried beneath layers of defense. Last night, it shouldn't have happened. Something sharp twisted in Adrian's chest, but he forced his expression into its usual mask. Right, just a mistake. Ronan finally turned to face him, eyes flickering with something Adrian couldn't place. This, whatever this is, it doesn't change anything. We had a deal, and that deal ends soon. Adrian nodded, forcing a smirk. Of course, wouldn't want you getting attached. Ronan flinched, barely, before turning away again. The contract's deadline was nearing. Ronan had the chance to walk away for good. And for the first time, Adrian actually wanted to stop him. Ronan had spent years crafting a life that looked perfect on the surface, polished, untouchable, meticulously curated for the world to admire. But now, standing in the middle of his own penthouse, he felt like a stranger in his own skin. He should have been relieved. The deal was over. He was free. No more Adrian. No more maddening, insufferable, insidiously intoxicating presence throwing his world off balance. And yet, everything felt wrong. The usual distractions, the women, the parties, the endless stream of obligations held no appeal. The drinks tasted flat. The conversations felt forced. The city he had once dominated felt suffocatingly empty. He told himself it was just the aftermath of a high-stakes game, a business arrangement that had blurred too many lines. But deep down, he knew the truth. He missed Adrian, and he hated himself for it. Adrian had always been a master of control. Work was his weapon, his armor, his refuge. He threw himself into it with even more precision than before meetings, acquisitions, numbers that should have occupied every corner of his mind. But it didn't work, because everywhere he turned, he saw Ronan. The empty glass on his desk reminded him of their late-night strategy sessions. The faint scent of expensive cologne in the penthouse made his stomach twist. Even the damn silence was unbearable. No sarcastic remarks, no pointed jabs, no presence filling the space like it was meant to be there. He had let Ronan leave. He had told himself it was the right thing to do. But now, as the absence settled in, Adrian realized something he should have known from the beginning. Winning had never felt like losing before. Ronan had spent his whole life running from expectations, from responsibility, from anything that felt like weakness. But standing outside Adrian's office, staring at the glass doors that separated them, he finally understood escaping wasn't the answer. Because for the first time, he didn't want to. The city felt empty without Adrian. His old life felt hollow. And the truth was painfully, blindingly clear now. He had never wanted to leave. He had just been afraid of what staying meant. With a steadying breath, he pushed open the doors. Adrian had convinced himself that Ronan wasn't coming back. That he had made his choice. That Adrian had lost the only game that had ever really mattered. So when Ronan walked into his office, like he belonged there, Adrian froze. "You look like hell," Ronan said, stepping forward. And I say that as someone who has also looked like hell for the past few weeks. Adrian let out a short, breathless laugh. That's what happens when you let something important slip through your fingers. Ronan exhaled sharply. Yeah, I figured that out the hard way. A pause, a hesitation. Then, I don't want to run anymore, Ronan admitted. Not from this, not from you. Something inside Adrian cracked open. Then don't. And just like that, the tension snapped. Ronan surged forward. Adrian met him halfway, and this time, there was no hesitation, no doubt, no more pushing away. The contract had forced them together. But now, this was a choice. Enemies no more, just two idiots in love, ready to burn down the world for each other. If anyone had told Ronan a year ago that he'd willingly be sitting in a conference room, finalizing a merger with Adrian Voss of all people, he would have laughed in their face. And yet, here he was, watching Adrian sign the final document that bound their empires together, not as enemies, not as rivals, but as partners. The room erupted into handshakes and congratulations, but Ronan barely heard any of it. His focus was solely on Adrian, who sat across the table, looking impossibly smug and impossibly perfect. You look entirely too pleased with yourself, Ronan murmured as he leaned closer. Adrian smirked. Can you blame me? I just secured the best deal of my life. The merger. You, Adrian said simply. Ronan rolled his eyes, but the warmth spreading through his chest betrayed him. Sap, Adrian only smiled. Then, as the executives and legal teams gathered their things, he stood and straightened his tie with a deliberateness that made Ronan suspicious. "Before we wrap up," Adrian announced, drawing every eye in the room, "there's one final contract I'd like to propose." Ronan frowned. "We just signed everything. What the hell else is there?" Adrian reached into his pocket, pulled out a velvet box, and placed it on the table. Ronan blinked. The entire room went dead silent. "Adrian, marry me." Ronan's breath caught. His brain short-circuited. Of all the audacious, over-the-top, ridiculous things Adrian could have done, you're proposing to me during a corporate meeting. It seemed appropriate, Adrian said, the corner of his mouth twitching. Besides, I figured a business deal was the only way to get you to say yes. Ronan exhaled sharply, glancing around at the stunned faces of their employees. Then, shaking his head, he grabbed the ring box, stood, and walked around the table until he was face to face with Adrian. "You're an asshole," Ronan muttered, opening the box to see the simple but elegant band inside. "But you're my asshole." Adrian arched a brow. "Is that a yes?" Ronan sighed dramatically. "It's a yes, but you owe me a much better proposal later." Adrian grinned. "Deal." And just like that, they shook hands before Ronan pulled Adrian in and kissed him, sealing the most ridiculous, infuriating, and undeniably perfect contract of his life.